In that silent mansion, the night hid secrets beneath the scent of roses. A moan from the garden woke the nanny, who descended guided only by instinct. As she dug through the disturbed soil, she found a box, and inside it, a boy, barely alive. But what seemed like a heroic rescue was only the beginning of a dark web of lies, power, and terror. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. In that silent dawn, the Ashworth mansion slept, enveloped in the luxury and quiet that only money could buy. Situated high in one of London's most exclusive districts, the property boasted a garden that was the pride of its owner, businessman Augustus Ashworth. But it was in this very garden that Jane Oliver, the newly hired nanny, felt that something was not right. Jane woke with a start in the maid's room, seized by a strange sensation. London's June breeze rustled the windows, but the sound that had awakened her was different, a muffled, faint moan, almost imperceptible. She lay still, trying to listen better. Her heart quickened. Suddenly, she realized the sound was coming from the garden, specifically from the azalea bed she had helped water hours earlier. "It must be my imagination," she whispered to herself, but instinct spoke louder. She put on her robe over her simple pajamas and descended barefoot down the mansion's dark stairs, guided only by the silver moonlight streaming through the large windows. Outside, the London early morning. Dew left the grass damp. The garden, the pride of Augustus's new wife, seemed altered. The earth, previously smooth and well-maintained, was now disturbed near Penelope's favorite azaleas, the current Mrs. Ashworth. Jane knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. She heard something. A faint sound, a sigh, almost a plea for help. "Oh my God," Jane murmured, rising in an impulse. She ran to the tool shed, grabbed a shovel, and began to dig desperately. The sound of metal cutting through the earth mingled with her accelerated breathing. Then the shovel hit something solid. With trembling hands, she pushed away the dirt and revealed a small box. She put her ear to it. There was someone inside. With a choked cry, she opened the lid and found Matthew, Augustus's 8-year-old son, with his first deceased wife. The boy's body was covered in dirt, his face pale, his lips bluish. His breathing was almost imperceptible. Panic turned into action. Jane scooped him into her arms and ran through the night, barefoot, oblivious to the cold or the ground. She burst through the mansion gates and hailed a passing taxi. "St. Catherine's Hospital, please, it's urgent," she cried to the startled driver, who sped off upon seeing the child's condition. She arrived at the hospital covered in mud, screaming for help. Doctors rushed over. Nurses took the boy from her arms. She stood paralyzed, breathless, until she heard the phrase that brought a glimmer of hope. "He's breathing, we'll stabilize him." Jane cried tears of relief and despair. She didn't imagine that her ordeal was just beginning. When day dawned over the city of London, Augustus Ashworth arrived distraught. Tall, with greying hair at his temples and a stern gaze, he was visibly shaken. What he heard seemed impossible. His son had been found buried in the garden of his own home. How could this happen? Who would commit such an atrocity? He asked with a choked voice, his hands trembling as he held an untouched, cooling coffee. Jane, still in her dirt-stained clothes, explained for the third time to Detective Robert Miller what had happened during the night. Her Cornish accent became more pronounced with nervousness. "I swear, sir, I heard a strange noise coming from the garden. When I went to check, I noticed the earth was disturbed and—" She was interrupted by the arrival of Penelope Ashworth. Even at that hour of the morning, Matthew's stepmother was impeccable. Perfectly styled blonde hair, subtle makeup, and an Italian silk ensemble that contrasted with the hospital environment. Her crying seemed too rehearsed. "How horrible, my God! My boy, my dear stepson," she exclaimed dramatically, casting a quick, sharp glance at Jane. "Augustus, darling, who could have done this to our little angel?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned to the detective. "Detective Miller, this young woman, as she's only been working for us for 3 weeks, she always seemed a bit emotionally unstable. Perhaps she acted on impulse and is now inventing this absurd story." Doubt began to spread like poison. Detective Miller, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes observed the nanny more closely. Mrs. Ashworth's words sounded convincing, controlled, cold, calculated. In a few hours, the woman who had saved Matthew became a suspect. "Mr. Ashworth," the detective said, "where were you last night?" "In Washington, D.C. I took the first flight back when I heard what happened. We have security footage proving my presence in the capital, in a meeting with the minister." Penelope touched her husband's arm with studied delicacy. "And I was at my sister's house in Hampstead. I returned in the early hours and went straight to sleep. I didn't even know Matthew had disappeared. I thought he was sleeping, as always." Jane felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. How could that woman lie so naturally? And why was she trying to incriminate her? In the waiting room, Jane spotted Louisa, Augustus's eldest daughter, a 14-year-old teenager who had arrived from her maternal grandmother's house where she had spent the night. The girl looked devastated, her eyes red from crying. "Jane," the teenager whispered, approaching when her father was talking to the doctors, "I believe you. Penelope doesn't like Matthew. Or me." Before they could continue their conversation, they were interrupted by Augustus's authoritative voice calling his daughter. Louisa quickly pulled away, but not without squeezing Jane's hand in a sign of silent support. In the afternoon, when the doctors announced that Matthew was stable but remained unconscious, Augustus finally faced Jane directly. "Explain to me how you heard my son in the garden," he said, his voice cold but his eyes revealing confusion. "Mr. Ashworth, I swear on my mother that I only did what my heart told me. I woke up to a strange noise and followed my instinct. I would never ever harm Matthew or Louisa. I love these children as if they were my own." Augustus studied her face for a long moment. "I want to believe you, Jane, but understand that all of this seems absurd. Who would bury a child in their own garden?" A heavy silence settled between them, broken by Augustus's cell phone ringing. It was Detective Miller, informing him that the mansion's security cameras had been turned off for a few hours the previous night. A detail that further complicated the mystery. That night, when everyone returned to the mansion, leaving Matthew under medical care, the atmosphere became oppressive. Servants whispered in corners, avoiding Jane. In the simple room where she slept, she was trying to organize her thoughts when she noticed a presence at the door. Penelope was there with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "You were lucky to hear him," the stepmother said, leaning elegantly against the doorframe. "But luck can look like guilt if it's misinterpreted. I hope you understand your position in this house, dear." It was a threat disguised as a compliment. Jane felt a shiver run down her spine. "Mrs. Ashworth, I don't know what's happening, but I only want what's best for Matthew." "Of course you do," Penelope replied, adjusting a perfect blonde lock. "We all do. Now rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As the stepmother walked away down the corridor, Jane locked her room door. Something told her that the nightmare was just beginning, and that the secret buried in the Ashworth garden was just the tip of a much larger mystery. In the days that followed, the Ashworth mansion became a scene of silent tensions. Jane tried to maintain a routine with Louisa, while Matthew remained in the hospital, still not fully regaining consciousness. Detective Robert Miller appeared daily, asking questions, observing, noting details in his worn notebook. On a rainy London morning, while Louisa was at school, Jane found herself alone in the mansion's library with the detective. Miller looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Mrs. Oliver, something doesn't quite fit in this whole story," he said, adjusting his old-fashioned glasses. "How does a newly hired nanny manage to hear such a faint sound coming from the garden, in the middle of the night, from her room at the back of the house?" Jane took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the suspicion. "Detective, I know it seems strange, but I've always been a light sleeper. Back in rural Cornwall, where I grew up, I learned to be alert to any noise, and I have a special connection with children. I can't explain it." "I understand," Miller murmured, not appearing convinced. "And what about Mrs. Ashworth? How is your relationship with her?" Jane hesitated. Should she be honest and risk her position, or maintain a facade of cordiality? "We are professional with each other," she replied cautiously. Mrs. Ashworth is very demanding about the house's organization." At that moment, they were interrupted by a phone call. It was from the hospital. Matthew was waking up. The detective and Jane immediately went there, where they found Augustus already by his son's side. Penelope arrived minutes later, breathless, claiming she was at the beauty salon when she received the news. In the white aseptic room, Matthew slowly opened his eyes. His gaze, still confused, scanned those present until it fixed on Jane. A small smile appeared on his pale lips. "Jane," the boy murmured weakly. Penelope quickly positioned herself in front of the nanny, taking her stepson's hand. "My dear, your stepmother is here. Everything will be fine now." But Matthew pulled his hand away with an expression of fear. "No, I want—" "Jane," he whispered, causing an awkward silence in the room. The doctor intervened, asking everyone to leave so the boy could rest. In the corridor, Penelope stared at Jane coldly. "He's confused, obviously, probably mixing things up because of the trauma." "Mrs. Ashworth," the detective interrupted, "when Matthew is more recovered, I'll need to hear from him about what happened." "Absolutely not," Augustus exclaimed, joining the conversation. "My son needs to recover physically and emotionally. No interrogations now." Later, when everyone left to have lunch in the hospital cafeteria, Jane managed a moment alone with Matthew. The boy, though weak, seemed anxious to talk to her. "Jane," he whispered, holding the nanny's hand with his fragile little fingers. "It was her, Aunt Penelope. She gave me a strange tea and then— I don't remember anything else." Jane's heart raced. "Matthew, are you sure about this? It's a very serious accusation." The boy nodded, tears in his eyes. "She doesn't like me or Lou. She says we're obstacles." "Obstacles to what, Matthew?" "To Grandma Josephine's inheritance." Before they could continue, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Jane quickly pretended to be adjusting the boy's pillows when Penelope entered, carrying a box of fine chocolates. "Were you having a private chat with my stepson?" Penelope asked, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just checking if he's comfortable, ma'am." That night, Jane couldn't sleep. Matthew's words echoed in her mind. Josephine Ashworth was the family matriarch, Augustus's mother, and owner of a considerable fortune in estates in rural Yorkshire. According to comments from other servants, the grandmother did not approve of her son's new marriage and had recently modified her will, leaving a good portion of her assets directly to her grandchildren. Could Penelope be trying to get rid of the children to ensure the inheritance went to Augustus and consequently to her? The thought was too terrible. The next morning, Jane found Louisa in the garden, sitting precisely near where Matthew had been found. The teenager seemed lost in dark thoughts. "Louisa, are you all right, dear?" Jane asked, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Jane, I think I know why Penelope did it," the girl murmured, so softly that Jane had to lean in to hear her. "I overheard her talking to a man on the phone. She was saying she needed to sort out the brats problem before Grandma Josephine's birthday." "When is her birthday?" "Next week. Grandma is turning 80 and will announce changes to the will. She always says the Ashworth family needs to remain in the hands of pure Ashworth blood." Louisa wiped away a tear. "I think Penelope found out she won't receive anything if something happens to my father." The conversation was interrupted by Peter, the elderly gardener who had worked for the family for decades. The man approached with a worried expression. "Miss Jane," he called, taking off his straw hat, "I need to speak with you, in private." Louisa discreetly moved away, while Peter sat on the bench, his calloused hands trembling slightly. "I saw Mrs. Ashworth that night," the gardener said, looking around to make sure they weren't observed. "I didn't want to say anything before because I'm scared. I need this job. But little Matthew was always good to me. He brings me water when I work. In the hot sun." "What exactly did you see, Mr. Peter?" "I saw Mrs. Ashworth in the garden late at night. I found it strange because she never takes an interest in the plants. She had a shovel and a large box. I thought she was going to plant something special, you know. But now, with everything that happened," Jane felt a chill. It was the proof she needed, but she also knew that the word of an elderly gardener against that of the rich wife of an influential businessman wouldn't carry much weight. "Mr. Peter, would you tell Detective Miller this if necessary?" The old gardener lowered his gaze. "I have 6 grandchildren to feed, Mrs. Jane. If I lose this job—" "I understand," she replied, squeezing the man's calloused hand. "Don't worry. We'll find another way." That afternoon, while organizing Matthew's room for his return from the hospital, Jane found something disturbing. Hidden under the boy's mattress was a small voice recorder, like those used for lectures. She pressed play, her heart racing. "Darling, have this tea. It will help you sleep better," sounded Penelope's sweet, artificial voice. "But it's bitter, Aunt Penelope," Matthew's childish voice replied. "Drink it all, my love. It's for your own good. You know, sometimes we need to remove obstacles from our path. Your father deserves a new life without past complications." Jane turned off the recorder, her hands trembling. It was the proof she needed. Little Matthew, even unconsciously, had protected himself. She put the device in her pocket, determined to hand it over to Detective Miller immediately. Leaving the room, however, she ran into Penelope in the corridor. The stepmother smiled as if she knew something. "Found anything interesting in my stepson's room, Jane?" "Just tidying up for when he returns." "Ma'am?" Penelope took a step forward, invading the nanny's personal space. "You know, I always found it curious how simple people like you get jobs in houses like this. Where are you from again?" "Rural Cornwall. Such a primitive region." Jane maintained her composure, despite the veiled insult. "I am very proud of my origins, Mrs. Ashworth. There we learn values that money cannot buy." "Like loyalty?" Penelope asked, raising a perfect eyebrow. "Because you see, Jane, in this house loyalty is with me and my husband, and disloyal people tend to meet unpleasant ends." At that moment, Augustus appeared at the end of the corridor, interrupting the tense conversation. "Penelope, the car is waiting. We're going to pick up Matthew from the hospital." When the couple left, Jane took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The recorder weighed in her pocket like lead. She knew she was in danger, but also that she was the only hope for Matthew and Louisa. At that moment, she made a decision. She would call her friend Constance, who worked as a secretary in a law firm. She needed legal guidance before making any move. That night, as the family dined, celebrating Matthew's return, Jane carefully observed every interaction. The boy refused to eat or drink anything offered by Penelope, accepting only what came directly from his father's or Jane's hands. The stepmother maintained a plastic smile, but her eyes revealed growing irritation. "Matthew, dear, don't be so standoffish. It's me, your stepmother, who loves you so much," Penelope insisted, offering a glass of juice. The boy instinctively recoiled. "I don't want it." Louisa, noticing her brother's discomfort, intervened. "He's still recovering, Penelope. Leave him alone." A tense silence fell over the table. Augustus, always oblivious to family conflicts, checked his watch and announced that he needed to make an important video conference. As soon as he left the room, Penelope dropped her cutlery with controlled violence. "Ungrateful children," she hissed. "After all I do for you." That's when Jane realized the battle was just beginning, and that she would need strong allies to face what lay ahead. The next morning, Jane woke up determined to act. During the night, she had spoken on the phone with her friend Constance, who promised to consult a trusted lawyer about the case. The recorder remained hidden in a small compartment inside her travel bag, covered by her few clothes. While helping Matthew with breakfast, the boy was still weak but recovering quickly. Jane tried to act naturally, despite the anxiety clenching her chest. "Jane, when are you leaving?" the boy suddenly asked, his dark eyes wide with concern. "Why are you asking that, Matthew? I'm not planning on going anywhere. I heard Aunt Penelope telling Dad that you're not trustworthy and should be sent away." Jane felt her stomach drop, but maintained her smile so as not to worry the child. "Don't worry about that. I'm here to take care of you and Louisa. It's my job and I love it very much." However, during lunch, Augustus called Jane to his study. The man looked tired, with deep circles under his eyes and a tense expression she had never seen before. "Jane, I need to be frank with you," he began without looking her in the eyes. Penelope has raised some concerns about your presence here. She believes you might be emotionally unstable. The situation with Matthew was extremely stressful for all of us." "Mr. Ashworth, with all due respect," Jane replied firmly, "I saved your son's life. I think that should count for something. And it does, believe me. That's why I'm not following my wife's advice to dismiss you immediately." Augustus finally looked at her. "But I need you to understand the delicate position we are in. Detective Miller is still investigating what happened. There's no explanation for how Matthew ended up in that box in the garden." Jane hesitated. Should she show the recorder to Augustus? Would he believe his own wife's voice or think it was some kind of fabrication? She decided to wait a little longer. She needed more concrete evidence. "I understand your concern, sir, but I assure you I only want what's best for your children." When she left the study, Jane found Penelope waiting in the corridor, pretending to admire a painting on the wall. The stepmother smiled maliciously. "I heard Augustus is considering your continued employment," she said, accompanying Jane down the corridor. "A shame. I really thought you and that old gardener would make a lovely pair of unemployed people." The threat was clear, but Jane was not intimidated. "You seem very keen to get me out of this house, ma'am. I just want the best for my family," Penelope replied, adjusting her pearl necklace. "And you, dear, are not the best. You are a disturbing element." That afternoon, while the children rested, Jane decided to investigate further. Taking advantage of Penelope's weekly tea with friends, she discreetly entered the couple's bedroom, looking for any evidence that might corroborate her suspicions. The room was sumptuous, dominated by a king-size bed and imported furniture. On Penelope's dressing table, expensive products lined up like soldiers. Jane carefully opened the drawers, feeling guilty about the invasion, but certain it was necessary. She found documents, jewelry, nothing that seemed suspicious, until she opened the false bottom of the last drawer. There were several identity cards with different names, but all with Penelope's photo. Regina Vasconcelos, Cristina Menezes, Adriana Lobo. Who was the woman who had married Augustus Ashworth? Really? Jane photographed the documents with her simple cell phone and continued her search. In the closet, she found a briefcase hidden behind a pile of shoeboxes. Inside, vials with unidentified substances, syringes, and a small notebook with detailed notes on dosages and effects. A specific page was marked, "Potent sedative. Use 2 drops for an 8-year-old child." The sound of a chi. Car parking made her quickly put everything away. Through the window, she saw the family driver opening the door for Penelope, who was returning earlier than expected. Jane hurried out of the room, but not before noticing a photograph partially hidden under the bed. She quickly picked it up. It showed Penelope with a different look, next to an elderly man in a different mansion. On the back, a handwritten inscription, "My dear Alfonso, soon we will be together in eternity. Your beloved wife, Christina." With her heart pounding, Jane returned to the back room and hid the photograph along with the recorder. She immediately called Constance. "Connie, I need you to research some names for me. It's urgent." On the other end of the line, her friend sounded worried. "Jane, the lawyer here at the office said you need to be very careful. If this woman is who we suspect, you could be in great danger." That night, during dinner, Jane observed Penelope with new eyes. Who was this woman who cheerfully served salad to the children, who smiled at her husband with studied affection? A widow of multiple husbands, a professional criminal. Detective Miller appeared by surprise after dinner, asking to speak with Matthew again. Augustus was reluctant, but the officer was emphatic. "Mr. Ashworth, your son is the victim and the only witness to what happened. I need to hear from him before his memories are influenced." Penelope quickly intervened. "Surely you're not suggesting that someone in this house would influence an 8-year-old boy's testimony, Detective?" "I'm not suggesting anything, ma'am. I'm just doing my job." In the library, Matthew sat next to Jane, holding her hand, while the detective asked gentle, age-appropriate questions. Penelope insisted on staying, despite Miller's protests. "Matthew," the detective asked, "do you remember anything from the night you were found in the garden?" The boy quickly glanced at Penelope, who maintained a sweet smile but threatening eyes. He squeezed Jane's hand and lowered his head. I don't remember anything, he murmured. Miller noticed the hesitation. Are you sure? Any detail could help. Again, Matthew looked at his stepmother before answering. I am. I don't remember anything. When the detective left, frustrated, Penelope patted her stepson's shoulder. Good boy, Matthew. You did well not to make up stories. Later, when she was putting Matthew to bed, Jane noticed he wanted to say something but seemed too scared. What is it, Matthew? You can tell me anything. She said if I told the truth you would leave forever, he whispered, tears in his eyes. And that then, it would be Louisa's turn to go to a dark place. Jane felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. Matthew, listen carefully. I won't let anyone hurt you or your sister. I promise. But we need to be smart and careful. Okay? That same night, while everyone slept, Jane heard footsteps in the corridor. She cracked open her door and saw Penelope leaving her room, fully dressed, despite it being past 2 in the morning. Silently, she decided to follow her. Penelope carefully descended the stairs and exited through the back of the mansion. In the garden, she met a man Jane had never seen before, tall, grey-haired, elegantly dressed. It's taking too long, Christina, the man said in a low voice, but audible from where Jane was hiding. I thought you were more efficient. Things got complicated, Richard. That damned nanny found the boy, and now the old detective is nosing around everywhere. I don't care, we have the deadline for the will reading, old. Josephine can't change the terms. The money has to stay with Augustus, and consequently with us. I'm trying, but that meddling Cornish woman. Get rid of her then. We've done it before, haven't we? Jane felt a chill run down her spine. She was facing something much bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. She slowly backed away, but stepped on a dry branch that snapped in the silent night. The man and Penelope immediately turned in her direction. Someone's there, Richard hissed. In a panic, Jane ran back into the house. She heard footsteps behind her, but managed to reach her room and lock the door. Seconds later, she heard soft knocking. Jane? Penelope's sugary voice sounded from the other side. Are you awake, dear? I thought I saw a light in your room. I'm sleeping, Mrs. Ashworth, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I just got up for water. Good, have a good night. Oh, and Jane, sleepwalking can be dangerous, you know, especially in big houses like this. So many stairs, so many possible accidents. Penelope's footsteps slowly receded down the corridor. Jane sat on the bed, trembling. She grabbed her cell phone and sent a desperate message to Constance. I discovered something terrible. I need urgent help. The reply came almost immediately. Jane, the lawyer found information about Christina Menezes. She is suspected in the deaths of 2 wealthy husbands in Brighton. Never convicted due to lack of evidence. Get out of that house now. Jane looked at the locked door and then at the window. She couldn't just flee and abandon Matthew and Louisa to the mercy of that woman. She needed a plan, and fast. Determined, she gathered her evidence, the recorder, the photograph, the images of the fake documents. She wrote a detailed account of everything she had discovered and placed it all in an envelope. Tomorrow, somehow, she would get it into Detective Miller's hands. Even if something happened to her, the truth would come out. As she put the envelope in her bag, she heard a noise coming from the corridor. Someone was fiddling with her room's lock. Quickly, she pushed the dresser against the door and prepared for the worst. The doorknob slowly turned while Jane held her breath, leaning against the dresser that blocked the entrance. Seconds passed like hours. Suddenly, a childish voice whispered from the other side. Jane, it's Louisa. Please open the door. It's urgent. Relieved but still cautious, Jane moved the furniture and opened the door a crack. It was indeed Louisa, pale and trembling in her cotton pajamas. Louisa, what happened? Why are you awake at this hour? The teenager quickly entered and Jane locked the door again. I heard voices in the garden, the girl explained. Penelope and a man. They were talking about getting rid of you and then us. You heard that clearly? Yes, I was on my room's balcony. They didn't see me because I hid behind the curtains. Louisa bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. "Jane, I'm scared. I think Penelope really tried to hurt Matthew and now wants to do the same to us." Jane hugged the girl, feeling her body tremble. "I'm here. I'll protect you both. But we need to be very smart now." She briefly explained what she had discovered about Penelope, or Christina, or whatever her real name was. Louisa listened with wide eyes. "I always knew there was something wrong with her," the teenager said. "Dad became blind after Mom died. He only sees what he wants to see. Louisa, I have some evidence, but it's not enough. We need more. Can you help me?" The girl nodded, determined despite her fear. "What can I do?" "Do you have access to your father's computer or phone? Maybe we can find information about Penelope's past, how they met. His laptop is in the study, but he never leaves the password with me." "What about Grandma Josephine? Does she suspect anything?" Louisa's eyes lit up. "Grandma never liked Penelope. She always says there's something fake about her. Jane, we can call Grandma now." "It's too late, dear. But first thing tomorrow morning, maybe we can—" They were interrupted by footsteps in the corridor. Both fell silent. The steps stopped in front of the door, and then they heard Penelope's voice. "Louisa, I know you're in there. Open the door, dear. We need to talk about your behavior." Jane signaled for Louisa to remain silent. Quickly, she helped the girl hide in the small bathroom attached to the room. "Mrs. Ashworth," Jane replied, trying to sound sleepy, "Louisa isn't here." "Don't lie to me, Jane. I saw the light in her room off and I heard voices here. Open this door immediately or I'll call Augustus." Reluctantly, Jane unlocked the door. After making sure Louisa was well hidden, Penelope burst in, her eyes scanning every corner of the small room. "Where is she?" "As I said, she's not here. Maybe she's in the kitchen getting water." Penelope approached dangerously. There was no longer any trace of her artificial smile. Her face was contorted by an expression of pure malice. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Cornish woman? I know you've been prying, snooping where you shouldn't. Do you think I haven't noticed your looks, your questions? Now you're involving the children in your fantasies. I don't know what you're talking about. You know very well." Penelope picked up Jane's cell phone from the bedside table. "Let's see who you've been talking to." "That's private property," Jane protested, trying to retrieve the device. With a swift movement, Penelope slapped Jane across the face. "Shut up. Who do you think you are? An uneducated servant without family, without anyone who would care if you simply disappeared." At that moment, a noise came from the bathroom. Penelope smiled triumphantly. "Looks like we have company after all." She walked towards the bathroom door. "Louisa, get out of there right now, you insolent girl!" Jane acted on instinct. She grabbed the bedside lamp and positioned herself between Penelope and the bathroom door. "Get out of my room, Mrs. Ashworth, now." "Or what? You'll attack me? Perfect. That would only prove what I've been telling Augustus, that you are mentally unstable and dangerous." The standoff was interrupted by a third voice coming from the bedroom door. "What's going on here?" It was Augustus, in his bathrobe and with his face marked by sleep. "It's 3 a.m, for God's sake." Penelope immediately changed her posture, adopting an afflicted expression. "Darling, thank goodness you showed up. I was worried about Louisa, and when I came looking for her, I found this woman threatening to assault me." "That's a lie," Jane defended herself. "She's the one who assaulted me. Look at my face." Augustus looked confused, glancing from one to the other. "Where is my daughter?" The bathroom door opened and Louisa emerged, glaring at her stepmother with teenage fury. "I'm here, Dad. I came to talk to Jane because I'm scared. Penelope isn't who she says she is. She hurt Matthew, and now she wants to hurt us too." "What nonsense!" Penelope exclaimed. "See what you've done, Jane, filled an impressionable child's head with lies." The confusion in the small room was complete. Augustus, still dazed by sleep, tried to understand what was happening. That's when his cell phone rang. He answered with irritation, but soon his expression changed. "What do you mean, Miller? Are you sure about this?" Everyone fell silent, trying to understand the conversation. When he hung up, Augustus stared at Penelope as if seeing her for the first time. It was the detective. He found records of a woman named Christina Millionaire'S, suspiciously involved in the deaths of 2 wealthy husbands in Brighton. The description and old photos match you, Penelope. Penelope's mask completely fell. Her face contorted into an expression of fury and contempt. You don't understand anything, Augustus. You never did. Do you think I'm just a pretty accessory like your other wives? I'm much more. I'm a survivor. Dad, Louisa intervened, Jane has proof. She found fake documents and an old photo. Jane took her bag and pulled out the envelope with the evidence. She handed it to Augustus, who examined the contents with growing horror. My God, who are you really? He asked Penelope. I am who I need to be to survive in this world, she replied coldly. Do you think you're so different? You built your fortune at the expense of how many people, Augustus? The difference is that I admit what I am. I never hurt a child, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I would never betray my own family. Richard intervened. Enough useless talk, Christina. He won't come with us, and the police must be on their way. He is coming, Penelope asserted, pulling something from her pocket. That made Jane freeze, a small pistol. We have no choice now, darling. You accompany us to the border, help us access the offshore accounts, and then you can return to your precious children. Jane backed away silently, planning to seek help, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned, startled, and came face to face with Josephine Ashworth. What's going on? The elderly woman whispered, surprisingly calm. Mrs. Ashworth, you need to go back to your room. Penelope is here with an accomplice and is threatening Mr. Ashworth with a gun. To Jane's surprise, the matriarch smiled slightly. So I'll finally meet the true face of this viper. And before Jane could stop her, the lady pushed open the library door and entered haughtily. Good evening, everyone, she announced as if entering a social event. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Penelope turned, astonished, trying to hide the gun. Mrs. Ashworth, what a pleasant surprise. Spare me your theatrics, dear. I've seen better performances. The elderly woman walked calmly to an armchair and sat down. So you're the famous Christina Menezes. I must say I expected someone more original. Your seduction technique is quite predictable. Richard stood up, visibly nervous. Christina, we need to go now. No one is going anywhere, Josephine Ashworth declared with authority. The police are already surrounding the property. I called them as soon as I saw you two jumping the garden wall. Penelope pointed the gun directly at the elderly woman. You have no idea who you're dealing with, old woman. On the contrary, Josephine Ashworth replied, unperturbed. I've researched a lot about you in recent weeks. Alfonso Gutierrez, your third husband in Canada. Fernando Mendez in Australia. William Spencer in the United States. All died in convenient accidents, leaving you rich. Penelope's face contorted in fury. Jane, watching from the doorway, realized the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. Discreetly, she sent a message to Detective Miller. Library, now, armed. How dare you? Penelope hissed. You know nothing about me. I know enough, the elderly woman retorted. I know you are a product of a system that teaches women their value lies in their appearance and the man they can conquer. I know you probably had a difficult childhood without true love. I know you learned to manipulate because you never had real power. I pity you, Christina. The unexpected compassion seemed to destabilize Penelope more than any accusation. For an instant, her mask of coldness cracked, revealing something vulnerable and wounded. It was enough for Augustus to rush forward and try to disarm her. In the ensuing confusion, Richard tried to flee through the back door, but ran straight into Detective Miller and two police officers who were entering at that exact moment. Penelope and Augustus struggled for the gun when a shot echoed through the library. Jane ran inside, fearing the worst. Augustus was on the floor, holding his bleeding arm, while Penelope, still with the gun, retreated towards the window. Josephine Ashworth remained seated, observing the scene with surprising calm. It's over, Christina, Detective Miller said, pointing his own weapon. Drop the pistol. It's never over for me, she replied with a bitter smile. I always find a new beginning. At that moment, they heard a noise coming from the door. Matthew and Louisa were there, drawn by the sound of the shot. Upon seeing the children, something changed in Penelope's eyes. An expression of defeat crossed her face, as if she finally realized the harm she had tried to do, Slowly, she lowered the weapon. "I'm sorry," she murmured, looking at her stepchildren, before the detective stepped forward and handcuffed her. When Penelope and Richard were led away, the sun began to rise over the Ashworth mansion. A destroyed and rebuilt family faced a new day. Jane hugged Matthew and Louisa, while paramedics attended to Augustus's superficial wound. Josephine Ashworth approached the group, leaning on her noble wooden cane. "Well," she declared pragmatically, "I think we can finally have some peace in this house." The truth, finally exposed, began to heal deep wounds that time and lies had created. But for Jane, the most important thing was that the children were safe, and that she had found an unexpected family in that mansion that had once intimidated her so much. 6 months passed since Penelope's arrest, or Cristina Menezes, as she was now known in all the country's news reports. The case had become one of the most talked about in the media, with special reports exploring her history of fraud, false identities, and relationships with wealthy men. Richard Mendonça, her longtime accomplice, had accepted a plea bargain, revealing details about other undiscovered crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Christina's trial had been a media spectacle. Jane was called to testify, facing the accused's cold gaze in court with dignity. Matthew, spared from testifying in person due to his age, had his statement recorded and played during the proceedings. The evidence was overwhelming: the recorder with the veiled confession, the false identities, the testimony of old Peter, the gardener who had seen her on that fateful night. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor had said in his closing statement, "we are facing not just an attempt to eliminate an innocent child, but a criminal career meticulously built over years." Christina was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20. Old Peter, the gardener who testified against Penelope, even fearing losing his job, received his own house in a quiet neighborhood and a generous pension from Augustus. "Courage deserves reward," the businessman had said as he handed the keys to the old gardener, who wept with emotion. At the Ashworth mansion, life followed a new rhythm. Augustus had undergone a profound personal transformation, dedicating less time to business and more to family. He enrolled in therapy, something he would previously consider for weak people, as he used to say. Now he openly admitted he needed to understand why he was always attracted to manipulative women, and why he had been unable to see the obvious signs of danger Penelope represented. Constance, Jane's friend, who had helped her in the most critical moments, became a frequent presence at the mansion. Augustus, recognizing her importance in the whole story, offered her a position as a legal advisor at the charity he now chaired. "If it weren't for you, Constance," he commented one Sunday afternoon during a barbecue in the garden, "we might never have discovered who Penelope really was." "Jane did everything," Constance replied modestly. "I just made a few phone calls and saved our lives," Jane added, hugging her friend. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, the family gathered in the garden, the same garden that had once been a scene of horror, now completely redesigned by Augustus. The azalea bed where Matthew had been found was transformed into a small fountain with sculptures of children playing. "Dad, can I go in the pool?" Matthew asked, now a much more confident and cheerful 9-year-old boy than in the past. "Of course, son, but wait for Jane or Grandma to accompany you," Augustus replied, looking up from the papers he was analyzing. Josephine Ashworth, who had decided to live in the mansion to ensure no other adventurer approached the family, as she explained, extended her hand to her grandson. "Come, Matthew. Grandma will go with you, although my old bones can't handle more than sitting by the water's edge." Jane smiled, watching the scene as she helped organize the afternoon snack table. In recent months, her position in the house had changed significantly. She was no longer seen as an employee, but as a fundamental part of the family. Augustus had insisted she accept a much higher salary, in addition to a formal contract guaranteeing her stay for as long as she wished. "Jane, hurry up!" Louisa shouted from the edge of the pool. The teenager, now 15, had overcome the rebellious phase that followed the trauma, channeling her energy into activism against domestic violence. She had even started a small support group at school for young people living in abusive homes. Louisa had surprised everyone with her resilience. From a rebellious teenager, she had transformed into a mature and compassionate young woman. "I think I inherited this from my mother," she once commented, showing Jane an old photo album. Look, she was also a volunteer at a charity that helped women at risk. Jane felt a lump in her throat seeing the photos of Clara, the children's biological mother, a woman with a sweet smile and eyes identical to Louisa's. "She would be very proud of you, Lou." "Do you think so?" the teenager asked, insecure. "I'm sure, just as I am proud." "I'm coming, Lou," Jane replied, finishing organizing the plates. As she walked towards the pool, she passed Augustus, who gently stopped her. "Jane, before I forget, a letter arrived for you." He held out an envelope with the letterhead of a renowned university. Jane took it with curiosity. 3 months earlier, encouraged by Augustus and Josephine Ashworth, she had enrolled in a pedagogy course. She had always dreamed of being a teacher, but life's circumstances had led her to domestic work. "Open it," Augustus insisted, smiling with anticipation. With slightly trembling hands, Jane opened the envelope and read the contents. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was accepted with a full scholarship." Augustus spontaneously hugged her, something he would never have done months before. "I knew it! They'd have to be crazy not to accept someone with your intelligence and determination." Josephine Ashworth, who was observing the scene from the edge of the pool, applauded discreetly. "Bravo, girl! I always knew you had potential for much more." Louisa and Matthew ran to hug Jane, soaking her completely in the process, which caused general laughter. "Does this mean you're leaving?" Matthew asked, suddenly worried. "Of course not, little one. I'll study at night after you're in bed. Nothing will change." 2 weeks later, Jane experienced her first day as a university student. At 27, she felt out of place among so many 18-year-olds, but soon realized she wasn't the only older student in the room. During the presentation, when she mentioned working as a guardian for 2 children in an upper-class family, several colleagues showed interest in her story. "You seem more like a mother than a nanny," a colleague commented after class. "That's exactly how I feel," Jane replied, surprised by the stranger's accurate perception. Returning home that night, she found Augustus awake, waiting for her in the living room with a cup of tea. "So, how was it?" "Incredible," she replied, eyes sparkling with excitement. "The Foundations of Education professor is captivating. He spoke about Paulo Freire in a way that made me perfectly understand the importance of liberating education." Augustus smiled, delighted by her enthusiasm. "You were born for this, Jane, to transform lives through education, as you have already transformed ours." Later, when the children finally went to bed after a day of celebration, Jane found Augustus in the library, the place where they had once confronted Penelope. He was sipping tea. He had completely given up alcohol after the incident. "May I come in?" she asked, knocking lightly on the open door. "Always," he replied, indicating the armchair opposite him. "I'm happy for you, Jane. This course is just the beginning of what you can achieve. All thanks to your support and Mrs. Ashworth's." "No," he corrected firmly. "Thanks to your own courage and determination. You saved my family, Jane. You saved my children. You saved myself from a blindness that could have caused irreparable tragedy." Jane lowered her gaze, still uncomfortable with compliments. "I just did what anyone would do." We both know that's not true. Any other nanny would have ignored that sound in the garden. Anyone else would have fled upon realizing the danger Penelope represented. Augustus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You are extraordinary, Jane Oliver, and you changed our lives forever." The next day, a new routine began at the mansion. Jane now divided her time between caring for the children, studying for university, and helping reorganize the house. Josephine Ashworth had hired 2 more staff to assist with domestic tasks, insisting that Jane was family now, not a servant. In the late afternoon, while organizing her new university books, Jane received an unexpected visit in her room, which was now a comfortable suite on the main floor of the house, no longer in the back. "May we talk?" Josephine Ashworth asked, elegant as ever in her linen ensemble. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth, please come in." The elderly woman sat in the small armchair by the window, observing Jane's books with approval. "Pedagogy. Excellent choice. You have a natural gift for teaching and caring." "Thank you. I always dreamed of being a teacher." "And you will be an excellent one. But I came to talk about another matter." The matriarch adjusted herself in the armchair, adopting a more formal tone. "Jane, as you know, I made changes to my will even before all this confusion with Penelope. I left most of my assets in trusts for Matthew and Louisa." "Yes, you mentioned that before." "What I didn't mention is that I made a new alteration 2 weeks ago." Josephine Ashworth smiled enigmatically. "I included you among the beneficiaries." Jane's eyes widened, shocked. "Mrs. Ashworth, that's not necessary. I would never—" The elderly woman raised her hand, interrupting her. "It's not payment, child, it's recognition. You have become part of this family. You saved my grandchildren, brought light back to this house. The Ashworth fortune was built by generations of hard-working people with principles. You represent those values better than many who were born with the surname." "I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing. Just accept that you now have a guaranteed future no matter what happens. You can complete your studies, open your own school one day if you wish. Your life is yours to shape as you desire." Silent tears streamed down Jane's face. From a poor girl from rural Cornwall to a member of one of London's wealthiest families, journey she could never have imagined. "There's one more thing," Josephine Ashworth continued, taking another envelope from her bag. "Augustus and I talked to a lawyer. If you agree, he would like to start the process for you to become Matthew and Louisa's legal guardian, along with him. Not to replace their biological mother, who will always be honored in this house, but as a second mother. The papers are here in case you want to think about it." Jane took the envelope with trembling hands. I don't know if I deserve so much." "It's not a matter of deserving, dear. It's a matter of belonging. And you belong to this family now." That night, during dinner, Augustus made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I have some news," he said, after dessert was served. "I've decided to significantly reduce my role in the company. I'm going to pass the presidency to my cousin Edward, who has worked with me for years." "But, Dad," Louisa exclaimed, surprised, "you love that company. You always said it was your life." "That was exactly my mistake, daughter. Making the company my life, while real life you passed by without me noticing." Augustus smiled, looking younger and lighter. "I'll still be on the board, I'll still have a share in the profits, but I want to dedicate my time to what truly matters now." Josephine Ashworth nodded in approval. "Finally showing wisdom, my son. And there's more," Augustus continued. "I've decided to accept the invitation to chair that children's protection charity that contacted us after our story became public. I think I can make a difference, use our case to help other families." Jane smiled. It was a complete transformation of the workaholic and emotionally distant man she had met a few months ago. "That's wonderful, Mr. Ashworth." "Jane," he gently corrected, "I think it's past time you just called me Augustus, isn't it? Especially considering what we discussed earlier today." Matthew, who had been quiet until then, suddenly asked, "Does this mean Jane is going to be our mom now? Officially?" An expectant silence fell over the table. Jane felt all eyes on her. "If you accept me," she replied with emotion, "it would be the greatest honor of my life." "I accept," Matthew shouted, getting up to hug her. "Me too," Louisa said with a shy but sincere smile. "You've been our mum for a long time, Jane. We're just making it official." Days later, Jane accompanied Augustus to the headquarters of the children's protection charity he now chaired. It was a simple building in central London, but full of life and purpose. Vulnerable children received tutoring, food, and psychological support. Augustus introduced her to everyone as the woman who inspired my involvement with this cause. A little girl, about 6 years old, with curly hair and curious eyes, timidly approached Jane. "Are you the lady who saved the buried boy? My mom told me the story." Jane knelt to be at the child's height. "Yes, dear, but you know what? He also saved me in a way." The girl tilted her head, confused. "How so?" "He taught me that we are stronger and braver than we imagine. that we can make a difference when we follow our hearts. At the end of the visit, Augustus surprised her with a proposal. "Jane, I would like you to take on the pedagogical direction of our educational program. I know you are still at the beginning of your course, but your life experience and sensitivity are more valuable than any degree at this moment. Augustus, I have so much to learn still, and you will learn in practice and in theory. These children need someone like you, who understands what it's like to fight against all odds." Jane accepted the challenge, feeling a new purpose opening up in her life. The following Sunday, the entire family visited the grave of Clara, Matthew, and Louisa's biological mother, who had died years earlier in a car accident. Jane made a point of bringing flowers and having a moment alone by the headstone. "I will never try to take your place," she whispered to the silent stone. "I just promise to care for them as if they were my own, with all love and respect for your memory." A gentle breeze rustled the cemetery trees, as if in response. Louisa, who had been observing the scene from afar, slowly approached. "You know, Jane, I think Mom would have liked you very much. She always said that true love is not possessive, but generous. Your mother must have been a very wise woman." "She was. And I think somehow she brought you to us when we needed you most." As they drove home, Matthew slept in the back seat of the car, exhausted after an emotionally intense day. Louisa listened to music with headphones, lost in her own teenage world. Augustus drove in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing at Jane in the passenger seat. "What are you thinking about?" he finally asked. Jane contemplated for a moment, looking at the city of London through the car window, a city that once seemed so intimidating and was now her home. "I'm thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. Less than a year ago, I was just a newly hired nanny, sleeping in the back room, afraid of making a mistake. Now you are the heart of this family," Augustus completed. "You taught us the true meaning of courage, loyalty, and love. We should be thanking you for the privilege of having you in our lives." The car stopped at a red light. Outside, London life continued its frantic pace. Inside the vehicle, a family rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal and fear found its own rhythm, its own path. "I think we all reborn in some way," Jane reflected. "That garden that almost became a tomb ended up being the soil where we planted a new life." When they arrived at the mansion, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in golden and pink hues. In the redesigned garden, the flowers swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Matthew woke up and ran inside, eager to show Jane a drawing he had made at school. Louisa followed more slowly, absorbed in messages on her phone. Josephine Ashworth awaited them on the veranda, a cup of tea in her wrinkled hands. Augustus and Jane lingered a moment longer in the garden, observing the house that now truly felt like a home. "Welcome to the Ashworth family, Jane," he said simply, extending his hand to her. Jane accepted it, feeling that she had finally found her place in the world, not as an employee, not as an outsider, but as an essential part of a greater whole than themselves, a family. "I'm home," she replied, smiling at the future that lay before them, bright as the sun that rose every morning, chasing away the shadows of the past. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Jane and the Ashworth family has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative of overcoming and rebirth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of British life in its multiple facets. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and hearing what you thought of this exciting drama.